Thanks for joining us. This is the AWG Pacific Northwest chapter, and we have a special invited lecturers. And this is on how to give great GSA or Geological Society of America talks and presentations. Today is Monday, July 15th, 2024. And our first speaker is Mariana Leite. She's a Brazilian geologist who's currently visiting at University of Washington, where she's doing research. She specializes in sedimentary basins and exploration of base metals to oil and gas, but she's most interested in diagenetic and hydrothermal fluid interactions. But I will let her speak. I'll let her introduce herself a little bit more. But second, she's going to be giving tips on giving a great poster lightning talk. And the second speaker I'll introduce right after her, but she will be talking about giving oral presentations. And then they'll each talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have about 20 minutes to discuss and ask questions. So get your questions ready. So Mariana, can you just tell us a bit about your background and then you go into your talk?
Okay, thank you, Minnie, and thank you everyone for inviting me and for introducing me. My name is Mariana. I'm from Brazil. I'm a PhD student at the University of Minas Gerais, where is my home state. And here I'm a visiting student working with Kate Huntigan in the ISO lab, working with some isotope geochemistry. Yeah, my background is on sedimentary research. I always work with provenience and also some hydrothermal deposits in sedimentary basins, and also the exploration geologist and for copper and zinc for almost 10 years now, before I decided to come back to the academia and do my PhD. But I'm going to talk a little bit about that because I think it's important to get the tips and where how I built my presentations and give some, hopefully some useful ideas for who is interested. So I'm going to share my screen. I hope it works. So just going to put here. It's working. I hope everyone can see. So yeah, can I start?
Sorry, I have myself muted. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So there are some tips for giving a poster lighting talk. So I will start with like my professional background, not because I think it's important, but because I have a kind of a different way through the science. I finished my master's degree back in 2013, a long time ago, and then I spent almost 10 years work for the industry. And I point this out because I think some of my experience as presenting talkings came from that time. Because as I was working as an exploration geologist, we used to have so many talks, even sometimes like weekly talks to the managers from the project. They are all over in the world, in other places, not in the project. So we get used to do these talks or online talks even before the COVID. So, and after that, I just started my PhD back in Brazil. And now I'm here in Seattle doing this internship for 1 year. So I'm sorry, my English sometimes is not that good, but I hope you guys can understand me. And what I learned from that specific time back 10 years ago, it's that when you're doing talks, you have to be very objective and try to make everything as clear and simple, because the people are not that interested in your work as you think they are. Even when you go in conference, they want to know the results, they want to understand a little bit of what you're doing, but they want that in a very clear and clean way. They don't want to go through all your problems. Sometimes you get stuck and get out of details, how you get to those results or to that, and that final result. And that's important for you, that you're working on that. But for those who are watching you or listen to you, they really don't care about. So there was something I learned to be very quickly and go through what I want to do very with beautiful images, clean images, and try to make it simple. So that's why I give this background, because something I learned from this time talking to managers and talk to a lot of people. So, and second thing that came to my mind when I was invited to do this talk here is that when I get my work on the coordinator conference in Spokane, and my subject wasn't I studied rocks back to Brazil, and was a very specific conference. So I didn't think anyone would be interested on what I have to say. And also I was, what I supposed to say in a lighting talk? It's like 5 minutes, one slide. What's the point? So I was like very anxious about it. And then I talked to my supervisor here, and she also gave me some very important tips. So, and the most important one is that the lighting talk, it's just getting people to see your poster, to go to your poster, to ask, to talk about about your research. And then when I realized that, I thought it was so great. And after doing the talk, I was even more fan of lighting talks than ever. Because when you go to conferences, you have so many things going on at the same time. So even if you're looking for some specific research area, some specific topic or some specific methodology, it's easy to get lost in all that abstract. So when you have the lighting talks, it's very nice. So you get through the posters and you know a little bit more about the person, and they give a brief of everything. So it's kind of easier for you to go talk to them. That's also a thing that I thought was very useful for lighting talks, because you get to know a little bit better the person. So sometimes I get shy to talk to strangers at their posters and start asking questions. So after the lighting talk, you feel like you can be more comfortable to do that. So, and putting all this together, I try to put down here some tips that I use it, and some of the Kate Hutgan, which I talked to after I was giving this light talk, to get some tips too. And I put them together, and Mindy asked me, the next slides are the slides I show in the Spokane conference, and I'm gonna try to explain a little bit how I built these 3 tips on that slide and what I talked. So the summary of all I'm talking is that make people curious about your poster and make it easier and clean and clear as you can. So, and that was like the most important tips I have to this lighting talk. So on these 3 points, one of those more important is also introduce yourself. And so people get to understand what's your background, what you do, why you're doing that, and point out your actual research status, like I'm doing that, I'm finished, what am I trying to achieve, what I already achieved. And yeah, and the last one is all about my background as talking to a lot of managers that use clear images and beautiful visuals. So people wanna get interested to see your poster and ask you questions and see more of your show. So the curiosity was like my main guide through this process of creating my lighting talk. So briefly, this was my slide on the Spokane conference back in May. I think was, I don't remember exactly, but it was this May. So my research was the pre-salt carbonate reservoir from Santos Basin, Brazilian southeast margin, a tectonic and isotope characterization. So I'm gonna go through it very quickly because on the conference we have 5 minutes. I think I'm not gonna use here because I cannot reproduce the talk as I did back then, but so that's my research area. My name is Mariana. I'm a PhD student from Brazil. I work as a visit student in University of Washington, and I work pretty much with sedimentary basins, diagenics, and carbonates. So my work that I present here on the conference, it's about some very specific rocks from their oil reservoir for a world-class basin in Brazil. This is called Santos Basin. They are pretty unique carbonate, as you can see on those images back here. Oops. They have these shrub faces. They are precipitate carbonates with a lot of porosity, a lot of diagenics modification, and they're deposited in lacustrine in arid conditions related to the opening of the Atlantic Ocean. But nevertheless, they are continental carbonates precipitate in a very restricted lake. So what we are trying to understand here is how these rocks and how the conditions of deposition of these rocks. And to do that, I'm using seismic models and interpretations associated with petrography descriptions, focusing mainly not in the diagenic phases, but how the fluid migrations and the burial history and fluid paths impact these rocks. So far, we have accomplished that. The reef geometry has strong control on the diagene's intensity and in the final depositional phases along all this area. So here we have all these beautiful faces. I have more of these on my poster. Also, I have a lot of seismic sections. And please come to my poster and you can talk about that in more details. Yeah, that was something I think I said back then. I'm not sure, but it was the right I would say these days. So trying to put them together, I just want to, first of all, introduce myself and try to make people know who I am, where's my background, and a certain way feel more comfortable to ask me and know a little bit about myself and my research. And then I try to put the two tips, like what I'm doing and how I'm trying, what are my questions, what I'm curious about, and how I'm gonna try to answer these questions. And for the last one, I just try to put some of conclusions or something I already get here. I try to put a lot of images, not clear as possible. And yeah, there will be that's pretty much what I try to do. Sometimes I put a lot of information on the slide that I'm not gonna actually talk about it, but it's something that if someone are interesting or curious, quickly can read and find, or sometimes something I think I need to remember and talk about it. So it depends a little bit. I don't like a lot of tasks because make me a little nervous. I start to read and not talk. So it depends for each one. So what I just to close, I don't know if I still have time because I cannot see you guys, is just try to make clear and try to use good images and talk and more naturally. For me, that's the things that work, and make people curious about your research. That'll be all, I think. And if anyone have questions or anything, please can ask.
That's terrific. And as you did in your GSA, you were right to time and everything. By the way, I really appreciated you giving a talk because you were in our field trip and you were quite nervous and a little bit discouraged with the lightning talks. And I was so thrilled to hear your talk. It was the best one in the session, in my opinion. So yeah, your advice is really great. Now we're gonna have people ask questions at the end when you're both together. So and thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you, guys.
The second talk is tips for giving an excellent GSA oral presentation by Amy. Amy, can you speak up so your pictures pops up?
Yep.
Amy Radakovich Block, PG, is a geologist with the Minnesota Geological Survey, where her work focuses on mapping the Precambrian bedrock geology and bedrock topography of the state of we have Minnesota. Right. Yeah.
Yep.
And she's also very active with AWG, but you're quite well known as a good speaker on our parts, and I appreciate you introduce yourself a bit and give us some good tips on how to give a good talk. Thanks.
All right. Thanks for inviting me to do this. I'm happy to do it. As Mindy said, my name's Amy. I work with the Minnesota Geological Survey. I have a bachelor's and a master's in geology, and I did a short internship after grad school before coming directly to the Minnesota Geological Survey, where I've been for about 11 years now. My grad research was on metamorphic petrology, and most of my work since I've gotten to the survey has been on Precambrian rocks. So anything in Minnesota, basically that means anything older than 1.1 billion years old. I spent a lot of time what I do is map primarily. And I've spent most of my time for the first few years working there, mapping mid-continent rift, volcanics, and intrusives, so a lot of mafic rocks. And then just within the last 3 or 4 years, I've started to get more heavily into Archean rocks. A lot of the Archean rocks in Minnesota are either 2.7 billion or 3.5 billion years old. So the really, really old stuff. And I'm learning a lot recently, especially about geochemistry, geochronology, all those kinds of things. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is kind of show some slides from my most recent GSA presentation. So it's going to be very hard rock focused, but I'm hopeful that it's information or tips that you'll be able to apply to whatever your research genre is. And I will try to share my screen. Is that sharing the slide or the presenter view?
That looks good. Slide view.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. So how do I advance here? Oh, okay. There we go. Sorry about that. So I just wanted to go over quickly some slideshow basics that probably most of us know by now, but that are kind of important to remember when giving a presentation. One of the things that I think is really important is to choose a neutral background for your slides. And something that you're going to want to do, especially if you're a researcher at a university or a grad student, is go to your university relations website. And I didn't even know that universities had relations websites, but I guarantee that your university or college absolutely does. And for example, with the University of Minnesota, where I currently work, they have a recommended slideshow format that you use that has their branding on it and whatnot. So you can kind of take some of the thinking out of it and go to your school's website and figure out what they want you to use. Of course, a lot of us have been doing presentations since middle school, and we know things about using appropriate fonts, sans serif fonts, aka fonts without the little like doohickeys on the ends of the P's and D's and all the letters. Those are the most accessible fonts for folks with learning disabilities. Guidance on font size is a little different, I think, for scientific presentations than like a business presentation, but I wouldn't go smaller than 24 for a title or 18 for text. And then one of the most important things is to look at the number of slides that you have for the amount of time that you have to present. And I recommend having fewer slides than you have minutes to talk. So I'm probably still going to go along with this presentation. And for 20 minutes, I have 18 slides. So if you have a 15-minute talk, which is what GSA often is, no more than 15 slides for sure. Something I also like to do is put an image or diagram on every slide, because as Mariana was saying, that's what draws people in. Good imagery helps them connect with your research. And I also think, as Mariana said, minimal text is probably the best. What you'll find when people are listening to your presentation is that instead of listening to you for the first few seconds of each slide, they're going to try to read everything that's on the slide. So if there's a ton there, they're just going to be checked out. So you want to do minimal text. And I say that knowing that I've crammed this slide too full of text. Like, this is more text than you should probably even have. One other good tip is to number your slides. It makes it a lot easier for folks in the audience to jot down where they have a question, and in the question period say, can you go back to slide 13 and discuss such and such? And also, one thing, just minimize animations. I say that not because they're always distracting, although they are if you like bounce your information in from the side, but also I've had it happen where there's something wrong with the presentation, and instead of importing with the animations, it just imports as an image. So if you have like 3 or 4 images flying in on top of your text, and you have to, for some reason, show your slides as a PDF, you're not going to be able to see any of the text. You're just going to see the last image. So basically, try to avoid doing that. And just a couple things about giving an oral presentation. First of all, it's really okay to be nervous. I think everyone is nervous when giving a talk a little bit, and you definitely don't need to panic about being panicked. But you should try to introduce yourself with confidence. Acknowledge your co-authors right away. I think that's also really important. And one of the best things that you can do for a good presentation is to speak slowly. I think we all naturally speed up a bit when we're nervous and talking. So if you try to speak slowly, maybe you'll speak at a normal pace. One other thing is to be conscious of where the mic is. I always try to grab the mic if I can, or put it on my, like clip it onto my shirt or whatever, because there's nothing more distracting than someone who talks into the mic for 3 seconds and then turns to look at their slide and point at whatever they want to point at, and then the audience can't hear the rest of what they say. Another thing you don't want to do is read directly from the slide. Obviously, that's kind of a boring way to present. And really, there shouldn't be enough text on the slide that you feel compelled to read. You should be using bullet points to sort of jog your memory about whatever else it is that you want to say. And I find that it's best, you can use presenter view, although that doesn't always work if the slideshow's not running right. So you might just have a note paper in front of you saying, okay, slide 21, these are my main talking points. So you want to just give people enough of a taste to know what you're going to talk about on that slide, but don't have it up there for them verbatim. And then one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever been given about presenting and I was given this before defending my master's thesis, was to remember that you are the expert. Even if the folks in your session have been geochronologists for 40 years and they may know the methodology better than you, no one knows your samples better than you. And that should give you just a little bit of confidence, because you can at least speak on the work that you've done. Of course, you can take in new information about how you might better apply, some type of procedure or whatnot, but really nobody knows these samples better than you. So you get to define what your talk is about. Okay, so I'm going to run through a bit of what my presentation looked like. The first thing you have, of course, is a title slide. Make sure that your title matches what was on your abstract. Make sure that you list all of your authors, and then it's important to also list their affiliations. I find a lot of people screenshot talks now. So you want to be sure that if they're screenshotting something, you're encapsulating in the first slide that it's not all just your research. One other thing that I've found really helpful is to take a step back for the big picture. When you have 20 minutes to give a talk or 15 minutes to give a talk, it's okay to take 30 seconds and just orient people. I've gotten a lot of feedback, positive feedback, for taking 20 seconds to explain the program that's funding the research that I'm doing. For example, the Earth MRI program is funding the research I do. And just to make people aware that this is a program where USGS is providing money to states so that they can do fundamental science to help potentially shore up supplies of domestic critical minerals. It's important that people know that, and it gives them sort of like an idea of what's coming and what the scope of this work is. And people always want to know who's funding this. So just stepping back out for that big picture view is definitely worth it. And to that end, show maps. I know a lot of talks that I've attended over the years, folks just jump into the research because they're so excited and so pressed for time, which is great. And you don't want to cut out critical research, but just showing a figure of where you're at is so important. And you may have like the foremost expert on igneous petrology in your session watching, but if they're not working on Archean rocks all the time and you start talking about the Superior province, which is the ancient Archean craton, they're not going to have any clue what you're talking about. So stepping back out and showing like the regional figure and then another zoomed in index map of exactly where you are kind of provides you with the opportunity to focus your audience on where you're studying. Another thing that I found really helpful is to make it clear what data already exist in your area. And that saves a lot of people from saying, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do this? Or why did you focus on this? Well, because we didn't already know that, or we already had that type of data or something like that. That's been very helpful. In this case, with my project, it's really helpful to highlight that this is the pre-existing data density this is like a 5-county area in Minnesota. It's a huge area. And we have like 37 data points for drill holes and 1 age date. So it helps me to convey to the listener, none of what I'm actually going to present is groundbreaking, but it is groundbreaking because we don't have any data here. So it helps people understand why you did what you did. It also gives you an opportunity to say, if you explicitly state these are the things that we did to analyze samples and these are the final products, it gives you a chance to like highlight all your collaborators. You can see down here at the bottom that I had a lot of collaborators for this project. And it's good to say, okay, this group is taking care of this type of research. I'm taking care of this. So it helps people to understand the scope of your work. Another thing that I really love doing is showing fieldwork or sample photos. People tend to love this. I know I love it. And it actually saves people from asking, sometimes they might be too shy to say, I actually don't know what a magnetometer looks like. I can't really picture this. And if you show them, it just makes them much more invested in what you're talking about. Sample photos, fieldwork photos, even explaining that, for example, this is a thin section, these are zircons, and that's how you collect age information, that kind of thing. It just helps people get a sense of what the scope of your work was. And it makes everything that you're about to talk about more meaningful since it's not so esoteric. One other important thing when you're designing your talk is to consider your audience. And I always say, don't be afraid to over-explain or oversimplify things. You may be used to the fact that an niobium depletion indicates that you have a subducting slab, but other people maybe haven't taken geochem in 20 years. And if you say to them, this pattern means that you're in a subduction zone environment, that gives them more buy-in and helps them feel less intimidated with whatever information that you're trying to present. I've never had someone say that I was explaining things in too basic a way and that they were insulted because of it. I think everyone, and I always do, appreciate when you give that information, that especially if that person doesn't work in a discipline that you do every day, that helps them figure out what's going on. Also consider the scope of the data that you want to show when you're developing your presentation. These graphs are an example of what not to do. This looks terrible. When you're doing a graph, if you have a bunch of different samples that have different plots, like they have different trends, those should be different colors, or they should be on separate plots or whatever. Trying to cram all 40 of your samples onto one plot is not going to be helpful if you can't tell exactly which sample it is that has this gadolinium anomaly. So just be conscious of what you're presenting, and it's okay to scale back your talk. I actually did this for GSA. I think it was another presentation recently, but I wrote the abstract on a full range of data, and then I realized I only have 15 minutes. I have to scale this scope back. So I took it from discussing all my samples to just discussing the igneous samples for that particular talk. People will definitely appreciate that. And you can also consider just showing representative samples to kind of streamline things. My next suggestion is to put a lot of thought into your slide layout and then reuse that slide layout, throughout the whole presentation. Here, I've really thought about what is the maximum amount of information that I can shove onto this slide and still have people kind of understand with some guidance what is going on. I use a call out box, like this gray box here, to highlight what I really want people to get, which is that this is the minimum crystallization age for this sample that we came up with. And what I do is I decide on a slide format that I really like. And I had, in this case, like 8 different ages that I was going to discuss. So I made sure to use the location map that showed wherever, like our whole study area. And then I just duplicated the slide layout 8 times and swapped out the graphs and the photo micrographs, so that, and then like drew a circle around which exact sample I was talking about. It helped kind of keep the presentation consistent. You weren't jumping around all over the place. People knew what to expect. Okay, this is that map again. This is that figure again. And it just kind of helps make things more cohesive. And it's just easier too. When diving into the data itself, I think it's really important, especially if you're showing the same graph multiple times, to just take the time on the very first time you see those graphs to explain what they mean. And you don't need to go into the entire history of how uranium lead age dating works, for example. But if you say, this is a concordia, and each of these little ellipses represents a different data point, and where the data points intersect concordia, that is your age date. If you have data that kind of go off the line, that can indicate things like lead loss. It takes 15 seconds to say, and then every time the person in the audience sees that figure come up again, they say, oh yeah, okay, that's what that was. And even something as simple as saying, these bottom 2 images are microscope images of thin sections, helps people kind of get the scale that you're looking at and a feel for what the samples are. I always err on the side of over-explaining the first time I show a graph. I also like to kind of come up with a little script in my head, like a 1-line thing to explain the graphs or the charts or plots or whatever. For example, this is graph 1 and this is graph 2. And I say, these 2 graphs both show composition, and I choose to pay more attention to the one on the bottom because the mobile elements aren't kind of messing with things. So this is the more reliable of the two images. That's all you have to say. You don't have to go into each field and why it's there. Just a generic sort of explanation of why the figure is there and what it tells you. Similarly, for these two plots on the right here, you can say something like, you can see that this plot is enriched in light rare earth elements and depleted in heavy rare earth elements, and that indicates that you're in a subduction zone setting. You don't need to discuss the intricacies of the data, focus on the trends. Another thing that I really like to do, I'm a mapper, so a lot of my presentations revolve around what did I change on the map, which lends itself really well to like guiding the audience to exactly what has changed. And on the left here, you can see my new map interpretation. On the right, you can see the old one. And I've drawn those two red ellipses to just show that this brown unit was formerly interpreted to be this size, and now we interpret it to be way bigger. Using figures really helps hammer home what the results are. And I imagine that you can do this with anything. You could, show where on the like tree of life your new sample fell, or show a map saying this continent was actually at the North Pole 200,000 years earlier than we thought, or whatever. Just anything to like help people realize, or help people kind of back out of the data and say, okay, why does this matter? Another thing that I recommend doing is using summary slides when you get towards the conclusion of your talk. Now, this one admittedly does have a lot of data on it, and I had quite a bit of time to explain this to people, but I like using red boxes like this to just group diagrams of the same type. And then I can help the audience by saying, okay, all of these three diagrams show basically the same thing. They're just made by different authors. And in all of them, the samples plot in such and such field. And that means that we are in such and such an environment. Whenever you can use a summary slide to take all of your individual plots and sort of put them together, it's helpful so that people can see what your general trend is, your overall trend. And then finally, one thing I do a lot to escape having a block of text on a summary slide is to use a table. Divide up your research into the kind of most basic categories. And instead of having 3 paragraphs saying the ages are this, the compositions are this, and the geochemistry shows this, say, okay, these are the 2 different locations the samples come from. These are the ages. We don't have ages for some of them, we do for others, and divide it up by rock type. Whatever your data set sort of lends itself to, just be explicit in breaking it down as well as you can. And this also provides something for folks to screenshot too. I know a lot of people do that during presentations now. If they just grab a quick screenshot of this on their phone, then they can refer to it later and actually like remember, okay, this is the summary of their work. So I found that works well. And then just wrapping up, again, present your conclusions with a table or figure if possible. I like to back out and once again remind people why it matters. So in the case of the research I was talking about, it matters because we had no data from this entire part of this Precambrian craton, and it's really important to fill in those gaps. So whatever the case is for why your study matters, that helps people to kind of take home the message that you want. Always put up a references slide because so many people will ask you to send them your slides, which is wonderful. And you can do that if you're allowed and if it's comfortable with you, but you don't want to misrepresent that anything in particular is your work when it's not. And you want people to be able to go back to the original source for various schema or anything that you're talking about. It's also important to have an acknowledgement slide at the end. You've already mentioned your co-authors, so that's probably covered, but it's also really important to acknowledge landowners and maybe tribes that have allowed you land access, the different laboratories you've used so that other researchers can say, oh, they do their age dating at Boise State, as well as any field techs or students that have worked with you that aren't actually co-authors. You can always indicate your ongoing work if you have time for that. But I would sort of eschew that in favor of leaving a little bit of time at the end for questions. And then one other trick that someone taught me when I was doing my master's thesis presentation is to have like a couple of slides prepared after your final slide that discuss things that you've, like if there's an obvious plot hole of something that you didn't discuss, it'll kind of encourage someone to ask about it. And then you can be like, ah, I actually have information on that. And then you can show them your slide. Or any, common questions that you might get if you're talking about a controversial topic and someone's going to ask about the pollution potential of a mine, for example. You want to be able to kind of anticipate what questions you might get, and then have a slide to discuss those things if they come up. And that's all I have. I am happy to answer any questions.
Wow, that's terrific. Both of you did really great. But overall, and we have a question, so I'm going to sneak in. Just what I saw for both of you is you had respect for your audience, and by being respectful of them and their time, you prepared well using good advice. You visualized in a creative way the poor person sitting there having to listen to you, and maybe they would rather be out, skiing or hiking or being with their family on that hot day than in a stuffy room, and to be thankful that they're there and respect them. Now, Mariana, you also brought up the really good point about curiosity. You wanted to pull them in through the beauty of your presentation, but also pull them in for curiosity. So I liked all of those things, but I want to ask Mariana first, and then we've got another question here. Mariana, you're speaking in English, and you are obviously Spanish and probably other languages. What do you think about when, say, for giving a bilingual talk? And this could also be bilingual in that it's the science terms is really another language, and that you have some people that do understand or don't understand the terminology. And maybe both Amy and Mariana can mention how they approach using technical terminology, and then also if they have people with different languages.
Well, yeah, I think it for not speak English, it's work like both ways. If I like to say, like, the first begin that I'm not a native speak English. I think everybody knows when I start talking, but anyway. So when I talk, I just say that. So I think I count that people will be generous to me and try to understand or forgive my grammar mistakes, and also I say, okay, feel free to ask if you did understand anything. I will try to explain, and also make you a little bit nervous, of course, because sometimes I cannot say especially when we talk about science, it's easier because when you use like the terminology, you read papers in English all the time, so it's kind of easier than daily talk. But sometimes you cannot just express yourself as you think will be able to do your, like my own language is in Portuguese. So, and sometimes I get to talk more than I used to talk just because I'm getting the right words or thinking a little bit more. But it like I work for both ways, I feel it sometimes make me feel more comfortable. People will be like, okay, I will try to understand her because she's not native speak. But also makes me a little nervous, more nervous in the beginning. Nowadays, no. Now I just, sorry, I cannot say the word, say wrong. But in the beginning, it was more hard for me to be courageous to talk and not be so shy of saying wrong things. But, it's better to say like wrong than don't say what you think. So,
yeah. Well, in Canada,
everyone here was very nice to me. So maybe that's because here in Seattle, in the University of Washington, people were very nice, and no one just laughed at me or was like, oh my gosh, cannot understand her, it's terrible. So maybe
you speak very well. In Canada, a lot of people will ask questions in French, for example. I don't know if you have people ask questions in Portuguese, your audience is listening in English, and that's really tricky. Have you done that?
Oh, no, yeah, no, I haven't talked in English and everybody. Yeah, no one speak Portuguese besides Brazil or it's a very limited or Portugal, but yeah. No, no one asked me in other language. In Spanish, they talk to me in Spanish. I can understand Spanish too. I speak a little bit, but yeah, English I feel more comfortable, definitely.
Yeah, you do really well. Amy, I just finished the question. It's the technical language as well. Like, you don't want to be too simple, but you're talking to experts. So do you repeat the terms, or do you have a tricks to like do you have any advice on that, Amy?
Yeah, I think I know what you're trying to say. I have a bit of a background in science communication, and I learned that most people, an audience of scientists is a little bit different, but most people kind of understand science on an 8th grade level. And if you think about an 8th grader's science literacy, they're definitely like they can understand and comprehend a lot of terminology. It's just that when it's too jargon heavy, it becomes difficult. So you want to strike this balance between not insulting their intelligence, but also not assuming that they have any terminology at all. It does depend on the audience, but oftentimes I will throw up, like I said, a tectonic diagram or even just a brief refresher on what the uranium lead system does and how you can use that to obtain an age date. I frequently put definitions on my slides because not only do people not have familiar with some of the geologic terms, you also can have a lot of assumptions that you don't really think about. Like, for example, I talk about iron formations a lot, and I make sure when I talk about them now, I specify, okay, an iron formation actually just means any rock that has over 15% iron. You're not necessarily implying that it's a banded iron formation. This is what a banded iron formation is. So I guess the answer is like, I'll use diagrams whenever I can and actually like put definitions up on slides, because I've never had anyone, kind of say to me that that's like condescending in any way. You don't want to like assume that people can't draw conclusions, but you definitely don't want to assume that they're starting off with the terminology.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Both of you did great. How about we have a question? Let's see. Dave, do you want to ask your question? It was a good one. I can repeat it if you can't unmute.
Okay, I can get on here. Just give me a moment here to get together. Basically, I do YouTube videos, and they all say that the average attention span now is 8 seconds or less, because that's less than a goldfish, they say. So they're always saying you're always supposed to be flipping these pages of pictures and things just to keep on stimulating people all the time. What's what would you suggest? I mean, obviously, scientific audience are engaged and they're interested, but a lot of people these days easily get distracted. So what would you recommend to keep people engaged?
I guess I would recommend maybe not staying on any slide for more than a minute. Like, plan your slides with enough content, or with limited enough content that you can switch in under a minute. And then I also do think it really helps if you have like a series of different samples that you're talking about, and you have the same slide layout, that you can switch from one to the other, and people can actually just see like draw their attention to specifically which point you're now talking about, and they don't have to like readjust to the whole slide. I think that's helpful to like draw their attention specifically to where they need to be.
All right, very good.
Yeah. Well, I would say, yeah, I think that's one of the points that I learned, like, it's not the YouTube, but when you talk to manager, they didn't pay attention on you. I don't think they understand geology more anymore. They are just concerning about how much you're going to cost them. So you have to give very strictly to the point very quickly with very clean images, just showing this is what you have to see. And like Em said on her slides, like if you have more time, you put in like on each slide what you have to direct the attention to what you want to see, and do that over and over again during your presentation very quickly now. And otherwise you're gonna try to explain a lot. Or I really like what Em said, to keep it simple. I think that's the best. People, if you're trying to use a lot of different words or very fancy words to say simple geology, you're gonna lost everyone in the audience. Even if you're talking to YouTubes, to talk even in academia, or if you have a room of a lot of people that understand work just with the same as you might lose them if you're talking too much, or how you get that, how difficult is that, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, people don't have no one pay attention to others when they're talking. That they're true is nobody cares about what you're talking. They already know something. All they know, if you're very like in academia, they already know the questions they want to make you, or they're gonna make you. So they're waiting for making the questions. Or if you're in a general audience, they lost the attention very quickly. So you have to do beautiful images, clean slides, and try to always make them curious about where it's coming from.
That's very good.
Like
Okay,
telling a story, like in a film or something like that.
great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that for both of you.
Those are really great answers. And I noticed both of you are smiling and you're looking with your eyes at the people. So your body language really matters. Mariana, you said mentioned a comment about the importance of, you said eye to eye, we would say face to face to give students a quick, is that what you meant? Do you want to just summarize what you were saying in your comment?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you have, I think like, that's kind of, when you're doing like presentations for students, I have some, as in my PhD back in my university, I have like TA a lot too. So you have, and it's, I think I learned that from my industry time, just direct people to what is important. Like Em was saying, show them in the map. You don't want to explain, you just show the image and say, look here. And then you explain what's going on there very quickly. And, oh, that's also happened here. And then you change again and say, look, it's the same situation, or in this sample, this happened, that sample, blah, blah, blah. It depends what you want to do, but you have to quick that dynamic and try to interact with them in a certain way. If you, I don't know if it's in YouTube, it's possible to do this, but like in the class or in the Zoom, you want to interact with the people. It's, if and you're watching them, and if you see like you're losing them because they're getting distracted walking around, so you try to change the way you're talking about, or bring something new, or it's important to interact, to see your audience, because you can see if you're being boring or not. It's easy to see in the face of the people if you're like talking too much for a random subject that, okay, people, I have to move on. So you cut and move to the next slide and try to get the attention back and do that. I do that. I don't know if Amy agrees.
Oh,
I definitely do that. I read the audience a lot to see, if you can see them like zoning out. I think it also, it's probably not everyone's style, but using a little bit of humor, not like a pre-planned joke or something, but saying something even like, in case you haven't had geochemistry in the last 20 years, like I hadn't until I started working on this project. This is what that means, to show them that you're not like above their level, and that you've only just figured this out 6 months before you're telling them. So I personally find that like an informal attitude is just more, people are more receptive to that.
Well, that's great. We have Paul has his hand up. So let's let Paul ask a question, and then I want each of you gals to just do a quick summary of what snippet of advice you might give. Unless Marcia has something else to say. Go.
Well, this is kind of a follow-up on Dave's comment about YouTube. I know since the pandemic, we've, the Geological Society of the Oregon Country, we now have a sort of extensive YouTube audience. And I know, Marcia, we put some of the AWG videos up, and hopefully you've gotten some traffic from that. But my question is specifically about a particular kind of screen formatting that we see a lot that's really appropriate in an academic lecture, especially when you're in a classroom and it's up on a big screen where you've got multiple images, and it just doesn't work on mobile devices or YouTube. We produce Geology Hour once a month. We have a scholarship for grad students, and we invite them in to either talk about their work or to talk about a geology news item. Some of them have figured out, one image per screen, animate your graphs so that they come up and you sort of see how the graph is composed, limit the amount of text on the screen. But for others, it's pretty clear that the multi-image screen with bullet points is kind of their paragraph. It's their way of thinking. And we don't want to, we're only paying them $75 for an appearance, and our scholarships are greater than that. But, we're getting early career scientists. We really appreciate their work. So I don't want to push them beyond the sort of what's professionally expected of them. But the multi-image, where you got graphs, you can't see the axes. And sometimes it's not always clear which image is being referred to. My question is this: how attached are people to that? How necessary really is that in terms of a professional scientific presentation? Are we pushing too far if we're saying, we want one image per screen, and you get, please make your graphs animate or at least larger so that we can see the axes? Anyone can answer that.
I'm sorry.
So are you asking, like, is it reasonable to expect presenters to make their media applicable to multiple formats of looking at it? Is that what you're saying?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
And also kind of wondering how it's evolving in the classroom, if any of you are teaching at the moment, how people are, because more and more folks are watching on YouTube, we're watching on mobile devices, and we're concerned about accessibility. But again, I noticed there's a consistency of the use of multi-image PowerPoint slides, and so that's I guess I've stated my question adequately.
I took a class this spring for the first time in a long time, and I actually was really surprised by how technology bound it has become. Like, literally no one took notes physically. They like wanted the slides in advance, and they the professors sort of had to work with it, that they didn't do those overlapping images, so that you had like, if you had successive images, you had successive slides so that they could take notes as you go. And I found myself really quickly being like, if there was an image that overlapped on the printed PDF, like being annoyed about that. So I think it really, if you're an educator, not that educators don't already have like too much to do, but I think if that's kind of the way people are leaning toward learning, it is, I don't know, it makes sense if they're paying for a class to give them media in whatever form that they're best able to like internalize it, I guess. As far as like giving a presentation like this to a class, like if I was just a guest lecturer or something, I definitely wouldn't have the bandwidth to like think about mobile formatting this, or doing two sort of presentations, one for horizontal and one for vertical format. So I guess like that, it depends, I think, if you're if you're educating a class or if you're guest lecturing, I guess. I think that would be the difference for me.
Yeah, and our audience is a mixture of professionals, young career, early career scientists, but also avid amateurs that we assume have the interest of people who are who will go to an undergraduate class just for fun. So they're folks that are willing to put in some of the effort. And that's different from, you know, what you're seeing on YouTube or TikTok and some of these more the higher production value videos that maybe Dave is producing. I don't know. Well, thank you. It's helpful.
I just want to add, I think Amy also addressed that when she said on her presentation that you have to be prepared for your audience. And nowadays, this is also something that you have to think about it because the technology has changed a lot. So I think it's super fine to ask people to do, or even because sometimes people just don't think about it. I have no idea that would be a problem to see like these presentations with multiple images in the cell phone, because I don't use it because I think I'm too old for that. So yeah, sometimes just bring it up and say, okay, now people are watching on YouTube. Maybe it's work better this way, or maybe create like standard presentation so you can just go through this visit and professors and they, oh, maybe you can just adjust your presentation you already have on these new slides, and if it's okay, and this if it's not, the people say, oh, we work both ways, but here is the way we're using now. So because maybe they don't do because they don't know. I won't know that, so that's what I'm saying.
That's great. Appreciate all these really good questions. I did have one more question before you give your summaries, if you'd each tell me. I have my tricks when I talk, and I was told when you start a talk, if you're nervous, look at the audience, but look just over the head of the back person. So you're not actually looking in their eyes, but they think you are, if that makes you calm. The other thing is if you have a difficult question, you can stand back a bit and you get their attention and then step forward. So moving forward or where you put your hands can make a difference. So what do you guys do when you really, I was going to ask about difficult question, but really, if you're really nervous, I want each of you to tell 1 or 2 points. What do you think to deal with that problem of being nervous before you talk so you do well? And you both did excellent. You did excellent here, and you did excellent when I saw you before. So can you, Mariana, you want to, could you give us 1 or 2, what you think?
Yeah, sure. Well, I usually make a joke, or I use humor just to make things more informal. I don't practice too much. When I practice a lot before a talk, I just get more nervous because I want to try to do exactly and say the same things, and that may make nervous. So the keep informal, it's good for me. So I keep calm. So I try to, when I feel I'm too nervous, I'm like missing words or shaking, I just say, oh yeah, and make a joke for something there isn't the slide, or like even in Spokane, I was the last one for the last day. And I just make a joke because I'm feeling like nervous. There's a lot of people. I actually wasn't expecting to be a lot of people there, but it was a full room. So I just say, okay, thank you everyone to stay here to the end. And everybody left, and that make me feel more comfortable and say. And when I have a difficult question, I just, now I just say, well, I also, sometimes it's the same question you're thinking about it. So I just say, well, that's the question I want to answer, or I really don't know now, but I don't know now. I'm trying to get there, or I haven't considered, I will consider, I will think about it. I can answer you later. You know, it's like, to be honest, when I have questions that I don't know how to answer, I just say, I don't know, and I can come back to you with the answer later, or if you have the answer. Sometimes people have the answer, they just want to show up. So if you wanna talk about it, please do it. If you wanna help, I do things like that. I just try to be informal, I think.
I like that. The being honest about what you do and don't know. It's definitely worse to try to make a guess, especially on the spot if you're nervous, and then just not have any idea what you're talking about and get called out on it. So saying that you don't know and you're willing to look into it, and then just offering to give them your card to get in touch with you to talk more about it is always a good way to go. As far as nerves, going up to a presentation, I don't really have anything specific that I do other than that I do run through it at least once, just so that I know whether I'm running 10 minutes too long and I need to speed up or something. That helps me feel better, just knowing that I have run through it. But then once a presentation starts, hopefully there's at least one person in the audience who's a nodder. And I always try to be that person for other people, but I just latch on to the person who's nodding, and I basically just present to them for the entire time, because then I at least know that they're absorbing it, and that I mean, I probably make a bit too intensive eye contact or something, but just I don't let myself focus on the folks that are scrolling their phones or zoned out or whatever. You just focus on the people that you can actually, if they've been nodding and then they're like, then oh, I better explain that better.
Wow, you guys are amazing. And the questions are great. The very last thing is if each of you can say a point that you might would like to have, you would like to state about what you think is important.
Well, I think that it's important just to trust yourself, like trust yourself, trust your work. You're not the best, it's okay not to know anything, because sometimes you get so stuck on the part that you don't know, and that's when you get lost. You lost yourself because you know that you don't know anything, but no one does. So just be trust that you're doing your best. And I love the nod fingers. I do that too. It's very good when you see audience. So if you're nervous, or find something that makes you calm and trust yourself, and it's gonna be okay. And even if it's sometimes not be okay, it's okay. It's not like, okay, I did this ICE talk, so every talk I gave will be great. Definitely not. Sometimes not. Sometimes I will miss important things that I want to talk. Sometimes the things go to the other direction, and life is like this. So trust yourself and try your best. You'll be okay.
I think you do well no matter what. I once had the slides didn't work, and I've had that multiple times. That happened for a big audience. And I was told by others that was the best talk they'd ever heard me give. Because you have to trust yourself, and you are the expert. Well,
I think this is the most important. Just focus on what is right on your job. Sometimes we just go for what's wrong, or for what you're not sure, or for the parts, people you ask, people you ask that, and I don't know. Yeah, they will ask, and you don't know because you're doing science. So it's supposed to be this way, and it's fine. And just trust yourself. I think that's the most important thing. No one knows, like Em said, no one knows your job better than you. And that's good for one side and bad for the other, because you get nervous because you know where the mistakes are, or where not the mistakes, but the parts that are not so good out yet, but they will be good at some point, or be open for others to work. And that's the opportunity for you to to learn, you know, these conferences are good. When people do like difficult questions, that's good because they are paying attention to what you're saying. And maybe they're gonna give you ideas on how to get the solution for that, or just saying, okay, I'm also I have the same problem, let's think together and figure it out.
It's really
It's
good.
to have quiet questions. The worst part is given a talk and nobody asks that. Because you
Oh.
don't know if they're not even listening to you, or if I'm saying everything clear, I'm boring, everyone's boring about it. So when you have a difficult question at the moment, it feels like it feels terrible. It's okay to feel like that, but it's a good thing. You did a good job because you have difficult questions. So you're doing a great science.
Yeah, it is a respect to ask questions, and I definitely am not going to, I'm going to seek out both of you as speakers when you're talking, because it's so enjoyable to listen to both of you, and it's so upbeat. Amy, do you have a last word to say?
Sure. I guess I would say that if you can focus on two things when you're building a presentation, I would say make sure that you set it up so that you're not presenting any data that the audience doesn't already know why they're hearing about. They need to know the relevance piece before you go into the data specifics. And then if there's like one thing that you can pour your time into, I would say it's making really good figures, because one good figure can really tie together a lot of things, especially if you have, you know, both data points and a geology map, and maybe include where there's outcrop data, all these kinds of things. Like a really well drawn, non-cluttered, correctly spelled figure can really boost your whole presentation. So spend your time there.
Well, that's terrific. I'm just going to ask if Marcia could just end it and say whatever wisdoms you have. Thank you.
I'm going to stop recording now, and then we can, wrap things up.